Okay, so the next stage for building this bow is, and this isn't really necessary, it's more decorative, and actually it's kind of protective too, is I'm going to be backing this with some rawhide that I have here. And this is basically, this rawhide is hide that I started to tan. It didn't go through the quote-unquote bucking process. I just cut it out of the frame once I defleshed and dehaired it. And so when it's wet, the glues in the dermis and the fibers go back together and they become somewhat hard, and not very wearable. But it's good for other projects. And in this particular project here, I'm going to back the bow with this rawhide. And on this one limb, you can see I've already done it, and I have some medical wrapping gauze that I've wrapped around it to hold it tight until it completely dries. And I do that with hide glue. So like with the sinewing process, you'll use hide glue and the sinew to lay on the back of the bow. And this here is just a bag of hide glue, and it's basically rawhide ground up, and then it's boiled down and then dried and then ground up into granules. You can buy this online. You can just do a search for hide glue. So I use about 2 or 3 pounds of it, and then it's water based. So then you just mix it with water and to the consistency you want or need, and you boil it down until it melts. And again, it's very tough but flexible glue. It's water soluble, so the bow you don't want to soak in the river or anything like that because it'll all just come apart. You can seal it with polyurethane and this and that, but to be completely primitive, or if you don't have polyurethane necessarily, you have to protect your bow. It can't be out in the sunlight too long, and it can't be submerged in water, and or humidity will affect it. So we're going to use this hide glue to prep out or to lay on to this limb of the bow. And as you can see, I already kind of started to mark it out, and I'm going to, where this ends here, let me get this in frame, where this ends here is kind of where I want it to overlay and match, and we're going to have it jut up against, and it'll be a seam that we're going to cover later. But in the meantime, I've measured this out to be wide enough to where it's going to cover the back of the bow, and long enough. And just like on this side, I don't want it to go all the way to the tip, okay? I just want it to go right about here, and again, we're going to cover that seam up later. So I'm going to finish cutting this out. Let's just finish cutting this out, and I'm using pen on the flesh side. So this was the flesh side. The non-flesh side, or the hair side, is much more smooth. Okay, and that's the side we want. That's going to be facing outward. So I don't mind the pen markings on here. So let's just see. We're going to measure twice and cut once. So I'm going to just make sure that I've laid this out properly. Make sure everything's in line. And yeah, that looks good. So let's go ahead and cut this out. There we go. Set that aside. Place this over here. So essentially this is what we have here, and what I want to do next is lay this out, make sure that it's going to overlap properly at the seam on the handle, just a little bit, and I want the length to be about right. So I'm going to snip this at the length. I'm going to snip this at the tip here. So I'm just going to cut in just a little bit. There we go. Alright, so the next step is I want to take my hide glue and I want to put a layer on the back of the bow here, kind of in the middle. I don't want this overlapping onto the belly of the bow because I don't want to have to resand it later to get rid of it. And I want to stop it right at the tip of the knock here. So I don't want to go all the way to the tip. I'm going to just lay out this hide glue here, like so. And then what I want to do with that is now I want to work with my fingers to the edges or to the tips. That way I have a little bit more control so it doesn't overlap to the belly of the bow. So, and again, the hide glue is water soluble, so I'm not really worried about my fingers getting too sticky. They won't stay sticky for long once I wash them. That's where we want it. Just like this. Rub that in. Alright, so I'm going to set this aside. Alright, so what I want to do now is I've wet the the rawhide, and this will help make wrapping and for it sticking easier. And backing this way would be more or less the same process if I was to use snakeskin. And I've backed some bows with snakeskin before, and the process is the same. You lay the hide glue on the back of the bow. You don't have to wet the snakeskin, it's actually very thin, and then you can just wrap it around your bow limb and then wrap it with gauze tightly and let it dry for a couple of days. A week is about a good time frame. So just making sure this is good and wet. And then what we want to do is we want to lay down the bow, overlapping a little bit our seam here, and I got a little hide glue on the side there. It's not a big deal. We'll sand that off later. We just don't want to do too much sanding. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take our gauze, and I'm just going to make sure that this covers all the places where the sinew is backing the bow. And then we're going to take the gauze and I'm just going to wrap it around. Okay? So this measures right. I'm going to do that off camera. I don't think I need to demo that. I think most people can get the concept of just wrapping a bow, making it look like a mummy. So I'm going to do that off camera. We'll be right back. Okay, so I've got this self-adhering bandage from the drugstore. And this is one bandage. You need two of them, two or more. And this is about 2 inches wide. Doesn't really matter how wide it is, just it needs to be long enough. But yeah, you can get this from the drugstore in the first aid section. So I'm going to carefully wrap this all the way around, make it look like a mummy. And since this is self-adhering, we don't have to worry about taping it. You could tape it if you want to. If you don't have something like this available, an old t-shirt ripped up would work just as fine. You'd probably just have to tape the ends where you start and stop. Okay, so here's the completely wrapped other limb, and it looks like a mummy. But I need to let this sit and dry for a few days. So I'll be back in a few days and we'll unwrap it. Usually within that time, within the time while this part is drying, we would then you'd start making your arrows. And arrow making is arrow making is a little bit harder than making a bow. You can take pretty much any stick and bend it and it'll fly an arrow, but the arrow actually does the job, and so your arrows have to be good. They have to be very straight, and then there's the napping of the arrowhead or the shaping of the tip, and then there's the fletching. If you want to make something that looks really nice, fletching an arrows is really just creating drag so that the arrow flies straight. So you can really almost attach anything. Leaves will even work as fletching. So I think archery equipment making, bowyering is very romantic. I think though, at the nuts and bolts of it all, it's really very simple, and it doesn't have to be very elaborate to create something that's effective and that'll work for you to get food. So, but anyways, here it is. We've just backed it with rawhide, and then we're gonna let this dry, and then we'll be back. All right, so here's what we have with the hide backing. And I've kind of lifted up the edges away from the belly of the bow here. A little bit of sanding, a little bit of the ink got there. Not a big deal, just sand that off. The reason why we put the hide glue on just the back instead of putting the hide glue on the hide itself is I didn't want it to stick to the belly of the bow. So it only stuck to where we applied the glue. So this turned out really well. It's a really kind of a off white color. And I'm going to take some additional sinew, and I'm going to wrap the tip here to kind of finish it off and hold it in place. But before then, I want to take a utility blade or really sharp edge, and just I'd be cutting off the excess edges or the places where it's not stuck here on the bow here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna right now unwrap the other side, and it's been about like 4 days so far, so it's pretty dry yet. It'll take about a week to cure, for the glue to recure and seal itself properly, but we can still work with it at this stage. So I'm just going to go ahead and unwrap this and see what we have on the other side, on this limb. Alright, so all in all, this turned out pretty good. And we have the handle here that I did overlap. And what I'm going to do with the handle is I'm going to take my sharp blade and I'm gonna cut this excess away so that it leaves a seam. We're gonna cover this area with a piece of buckskin for a handle so the seam will be hidden. Okay, not a completely invisible seam there, but I'm not that concerned about it because it's going to be covered up anyways. Again, if you were not going to add a covering to this, then you'd be a lot more careful in making sure that these two ends meet solidly so that it looks nice. But my intention is to cover it up, so I'm okay with it. So the next step on this is just to trim. So I'm going to take my sharp edge and I'm going to trim away this excess along the belly of the bow here on both limbs. Alright, so here is the finished piece here with the hide backing attached to it, and it's a little rough, but I don't mind. And you know, this is just really for demo and just for, like I said, just a practice bow for my daughter. And what I'm going to do is I would totally like to stain this using natural walnut, but I had to move and I had to get rid of some of my supplies in my move, and it's not black walnut season, so I can't harvest any right now. So I'm opting to go the modern route and stain this whole thing with commercially bought stain. I think the next bow I will make will be one for myself, And I'll go through the same process. Start out as a self bow that is perfectly practical and usable at that stage, and then sinew backing it. I'll probably back it with either rawhide or maybe even snake skin or even fish skin for that matter. And then I'll use black walnut stain this time, so a natural stain to be completely all natural for the end product. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and just stain this up with this commercial bought stuff, and then I'm going to use polyurethane to seal it and to protect it. You know, again, these are modern things. You know, aerosols are bad, chemicals are bad. We all know that. I just kind of want to get this done. So that's what I'm going to do with this, and then when it all dries, I'll walk through how to make and put on a handle out of buckskin for this, and then this thing will be done.